Frost and around 29 other Conservatives says it's time to reverse this moratorium. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. Lord Frost says ending it would lead to a British energy renaissance. Police have moved in to clear and arrest the remaining protesters near North America's busiest land border, crossing the Ambassador Bridge in Canada. Demonstrators opposing vaccine mandates had occupied the bridge for 5 days, slowing trade and prompting President Biden to call for an end to the siege. Police barricades remain in place, and it's not immediately clear when the bridge might be reopened. Now, how about this for a compensation claim? Northern Power has apologised after 74 customers were sent cheques worth an eye-watering, wait for it, £2.3 trillion each. Yes, one customer tweeted an image of what he got, received after power cuts during Storm Arwen last November, and jokingly asked if the company was sure they could afford it. Well, the company said they've all been cancelled now, and the correct amounts are in the post. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather wet and windy at first, but rain and wind will gradually ease overnight. Let's take a look at the details. After a rather wet day in the southwest, it will turn drier this evening. Winds will gradually ease too, but it will be remaining on the cloudy side. A wetter end to the day across the southeast as heavy and persistent rain continues. It'll be windy here too. Also a cloudy end today across Wales, but rain will be lighter than it was earlier. Patchy rain and drizzle will continue throughout the evening and overnight. Across the Midlands now, rain will gradually ease, leaving a cloudy evening with outbreaks of drizzle at times. Heavy rain will clear northern England this evening, but the thick cloud could still bring some light rain at times. The cloud and brisk wind will keep temperatures up. It will be a wetter end to the day across Scotland, with some persistent rain and a little snow as well over the Highlands. Now, a damp end to the day also across Northern Ireland. The rain from earlier will bring a fair amount of spray on the roads across the UK, so take care if you're travelling this evening. Skies will stay cloudy overnight and heavy rain will gradually clear the southeast. However, further outbreaks of rain are likely, particularly in the north and west. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Welcome indeed to the political correction. Dame Cressida Dick this week announced that she's going to step down as Metropolitan Police Commissioner. She's thought to have offered her resignation after declining to meet London Mayor Sadiq Khan to discuss plans to reform the Met. Sadiq Khan said that he was not satisfied with her response to calls to change the police force following a series of scandals. And joining us to discuss the resignation is former Scotland Yard Detective Peter Blexy. Well, what's the solution, Peter?
Policing in itself is a pretty simplistic thing. If you were to walk down the road and ask the public what they want, I'm convinced they will tell you they want to be safe and they want bad people locked up. That's what they want the police to do. Of course, there are complexities around policing because of the nature of certain investigations and the such like. But essentially, the public are the police's customers. It's the public that should be listened to, not the politicians. And we now need a commissioner who can engage with the rank and file and support them, but also send out a very clear message that if you do something that is unacceptable, then you will be found out and you will be drummed out.
On your very first point about keeping the public safe, I fear that one thing that may be lost in all this is that the Met, I think, has been pretty effective at protecting us from terrorism. And I think in all the charge sheet that's been brought forward against Cressida Dick, we perhaps forget that. You're putting a lot of emphasis on the police's dealings with the public, which I'm sure are important. But it's interesting to me that there was some difference, was there not, between the remarks that Sadiq Khan was making about Cressida Dick's departure and those made by Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. That is to say, what he was talking about was the culture of misogyny and homophobia, all of which is extremely unpleasant. But the Home Secretary went to the point about knife crime and safety on the streets and protecting the public. Which of the two was closer to the point, do you think?
Well, firstly, I must touch on the terrorism point, and you are right, the police and the security services have done some sterling work in thwarting various plots, not all of them, sadly, but many. But the resources that have been deployed to counter-terrorism work has come at a price. And essentially, it's neighbourhood policing within the Met that has been sacrificed in order to plough additional resources into counter-terrorism work. Secondly, yes, we get mixed messages between the Home Office and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. We have a Labour Mayor. We have a Tory Home Secretary. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that they will choose to feature on different aspects of policing and crime. But both of them have been misleading the public. And sadly today, Sadiq Khan has repeated the mistakes of Priti Patel and others that they've committed only recently, and that is in saying that crime is down. This is selective quotations. This is not the whole unvarnished truth, because once we factor in fraud, which is utterly rampant, and online crime, crime is very much indeed going up.
Peter, we often hear the phrase "Bobbies on the beat." We need more Bobbies on the beat, and it seems to me, I mean, is it a cliche? Because I have to say, in my experience, it seems to me that the police have largely withdrawn from the streets. I mean, I cannot remember the last time I saw a police officer just patrolling on foot along the streets. And it seems to me that that actually is an integral part of policing, that type of intelligence-led policing. So, I mean, is that true? Do police officers recognise that they have withdrawn from the streets, or is that a cliche? Because it certainly seems to be true from where I think many members of the public are sitting.
Yes, you are highly unlikely today to see a police officer patrolling at some leisurely stroll down the road with their hands clasped behind their back, nodding and saying good morning and listening to people, going into people's houses and coming back to the station at the end of their shift, awash with tea and awash with information. Sadly, that is a bygone thing that used to happen in my day. Police officers now are invariably in vehicles with an astonishingly high workload, going from 999 call to yet another 999 call. And the vast majority of them do that work selflessly and quite brilliantly. But yes, people want to see a cop on their streets. People want to see a police and crime police support officer walking down their streets so they can offer them a cup of tea and a biscuit. But sadly, that's all gone for the time being.
Let's bring in Arlene, because Peter, you've been saying that we should separate politics from policing. But I suspect one place that knows a bit about this is Northern Ireland. Arlene, how have you reacted to that thought that you separate politics from policing?
Well, first of all, let me agree with Paul. My late father was a police constable and used to do the beat in our local town. Used to walk about with his hands behind his back, talking to everybody and engaging with the community, and therefore letting them see the face of policing. I really yearn for those days again. But I was interested, Peter, it brought back, when you talked about politics and policing, it brought me back to a statement, an article actually, which the Greater Manchester Chief Constable, Stephen Watson, gave last year, when he said that the public are fed up with virtue signalling. And what they want is actually the police to do their job. And I think that's what you are talking about. And really there was this great difference in emphasis, I'm going to put it like that, between what Sadiq Khan had to say about a culture. They needed to tackle a culture in the Met, and he's written again today about that. Whereas the Home Secretary is talking about dealing with knife crime, getting weapons off our streets, making people feel safe again. And surely that's the job of the police, instead of trying to deal with all the ills of society.
Well, Mr. Watson presides over Greater Manchester Police, which is a service itself in special measures. So the failings of police, sadly, go the length and breadth of the nation. And it's not just the Met that has a lot to do. But in terms of separating the policing from the politics, whosoever the next commissioner may be, when they are appointed, I feel has to send out a very clear message to the Home Secretary and say, you may appoint me, but you are not my puppet master. I serve the public. I listen to the public. Me and my staff work for the public, not the politicians. And if the incoming commissioner can send out that powerful message, it will chime with their officers and the public, and we might take a huge step forward.
Although Sadiq Khan didn't mention it, I suspect that politics was partly her downfall. I mean, the decision that was made by the Met to investigate the Partygate and therefore to block the Sue Gray report from coming out in its entirety seemed to me like a disastrously clumsy intervention in a field which was obviously political. Maybe, Paul, you have a view on that. Did you feel that there was a better way of averting that disaster for the police?
I think there was a serious misstep. I think there's been a number of missteps. That was the latest one, of course. But I think, Michael, and I'd be interested in Peter's views, I think these issues are much broader than who happens to be in charge of the Met at any particular time. It seems to me the old metaphor of changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. If the whole institution is going in the wrong direction, which I have to say I think the police as an institution is, then I'm not sure it makes much of a difference who's at the top. I mean, it seems to me that there isn't an institution in Britain whose own ethos is more at divergence with ordinary members of the public than the police. I think members of the public want the police to be talking about, preventing crime, tackling burglaries, all of this sort of stuff, tackling antisocial behaviour, that kind of thing, tackling the drug dealer on the corner of their street where, I mean, if you go on social media, for example, and look at the various police accounts, they're far more likely to be talking about their commitment to LGBT rights. Now, I'm not saying that stuff isn't important, but in terms of prioritising things and trying to make sure your priorities chime with those of the public, it seems to me that the police have just got that completely wrong.
And can I challenge you here, Peter? Because I think the solution you suggest is that the commissioner needs to be someone in touch with the police on the ground, needs to have much more contact with officers actually doing their job. But unfortunately, this Charing Cross police station business has revealed that some of the attitudes down on the ground are very unsatisfactory from the point of view of dealing with the public. You can't have misogyny in a police force which is dealing with 50% women. So are you really right in saying the solution is to be more in touch with the officers down in the stations?
A number of things to deal with there,
yes,
if I may, gentlemen. First of all, Partygate. Now, one of Cressida Dick's major failures of judgment towards the end of her tenure was when those allegations came to light. And let's remember, those allegations were made by credible news outlets, the Mirror newspaper and ITV News. At that point, when those criminal allegations were made, Cressida Dick should have said, "They're crimes, we're going to investigate them." She didn't. She did the exact opposite. And then, of course, somebody had to investigate them, so Sue Gray came into being. If Cressida Dick had made the right decision in the first place, the Sue Gray investigation, in all likelihood, wouldn't even have happened, and we wouldn't be in this entirely unsatisfactory halfway house that we find ourselves in at the moment. Another point, with regards to the police reaching out to various community groups and various interest groups and various different sections of society. The police need to be there for everyone. As Commissioner, I would not allow any officer of any rank to wear any symbol displaying allegiance or support for any organisation. Only by wearing nothing on their uniform, apart from what they are officially issued with, do they show that they are there for everyone. And the police needs to be there for everyone. And finally, if I may, about being in touch with the rank and file on the front line. That is vitally important. But because, of course, police officers know what's right and wrong, okay? They should also know the law. So they need to be encouraged to step forward when there is wrongdoing, to challenge it at each and every opportunity. And they need to know that their ultimate boss, the Commissioner, is there for them when they do that.
Peter, I'm smiling because you demonstrate the difference between a policeman and a politician, because you were given 3 questions and you were determined to answer all of them. Arlene, do you have any expectation at all that if there's a change at the top in the Met, that the Met will change?
Well, look, leadership's important, and I do agree with Paul that obviously it has to go right down to the bottom, but leadership's important, and I think it is important that the next commissioner shows the sort of leadership that's there. I mean, I have to say, I think Cressida Dick has been a very unlucky commissioner because she's dealing with things that didn't happen under her tenure. But then, of course, she's dealing with things that did happen under her tenure as well. So she has to come forward with that. I was interviewing former Chief Superintendent Parm Sandhu on my programme on Friday, and she had the attitude that Cressida Dick has had enough time to deal with all of these issues and therefore should have came forward with an action plan that satisfied the mayor. Because I had been saying to her that was she being treated unfairly? Because, of course, the Federation and the police officers in the Met themselves quite liked Cressida Dick because she stood up for the police officers when they were challenged. So it's a question of, and we'll talk about this a bit later, about an institution being defensive when they're challenged. You need a leader that is actually open to taking challenge, but if they're confident enough in their organisation, they can take that challenge and be accountable for things that have happened in their organisation. So what the Met needs now is an officer that feels confident that everything that is going on in the Met, that he or she can be accountable for. And it's going to be a very, very difficult job. I've heard Peter talk about taking politics out of policing, and we've heard that many, many times. But of course, policing has to operate in the context of the political situation that it finds itself in. And that's why we've seen a lot of focus on some of the cultural issues that we've talked about, whether it's misogyny, whether it's sexism, racism, or homophobia as well.
Two quick questions, because we're running out of time. Paul, you have a feeling that she was the wrong appointment to begin with, Cressida Dick. Peter, I'd be interested to know what you think about a candidate who's supposedly favoured by Priti Patel, who's called Lynn Owens, I think. Paul.
Yeah, I felt it was a political appointment. I felt that Cressida Dick ticked the right boxes in terms of the ideology, the ethos that the police and government were pursuing at the time. I mean, let's not forget she was instrumental in the police's response to the John Charles de Menezes incident, where that person was killed on the London Underground. I suspect that if that were any other police officer, a male police officer, for example, that would have been the end of any hopes of promotion for that particular officer. So I think Cressida Dick was appointed for a particular reason. It was political, and I suspect very strongly that the next appointment's going to be political as well.
Well, without leading you on that point, Lynn Owens has been mentioned.
Yes, she has. Former head of the National Crime Agency, who stepped down from that role not so long ago. The NCA operates very differently from policing because it's not patrolling the streets, it's not answering 999 calls. And she does, of course, come from a policing background, however. But I've had recent dealings with the NCA and the police, and I'd just like to pick up on what Arlene said. They are defensive. And this, unfortunately, is their default position of so many law enforcement bodies. They need to shed that. They need to realise that actually most of the public are still on their side and want them to do well. And we can keep the politics out, because if the public are happy, because the police are doing their job well, then the politicians will benefit from that anyway. So would they kindly keep their noses out of it?
Well, are you on the side of the Metropolitan Police? Let's hear your views. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the origins of COVID-19 with renowned scientist Matt Ridley. So don't go away, please.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Well, your GB views have been coming in. Marion says, Sadiq Khan will not approve any head of the Met unless they're sympathetic to his causes.
And Robert says Khan should have nothing to do with the appointment of the new commissioner. He is only a mayor. Commissioners report to the Home Secretary. I think ultimately the decision rests with the Home Secretary, but she has to have regard for the views of the mayor, I think.
It is the most curious situation where we have these two people involved. So, it's not very clear where responsibility lies. Pauline says, let us have police stations back in our local communities. That's rather echoing one of the discussion points. Last one from you, Paul.
Yeah, and Dave says, I can't see the sense where a political mayor of opposite views to the government, the point that we were just making, who should be paying the police commissioners, is effectively sacking the mayor by criticism and threats.
So, a change of subject. President Joe Biden has spoken to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, over the phone in a bid diplomatically to resolve the escalating situation on the Ukrainian border. It comes amid reports of Putin bolstering his troops on the border, with many onlookers fearing that a Russian attack could be imminent. Both the United States and the United Kingdom governments have advised their citizens to leave Ukraine. Arlene, I don't know what value there is really in you and the two of us giving our opinions as to whether this is likely to happen. But let's just start there. Are you feeling more fearful this week? We're being told that it might happen as soon as Wednesday.
Yeah, I noticed that people are now starting to predict the day of the invasion, which is quite worrying, I have to say, because up until now we were talking about if it's going to take place, and now people are actually talking about when it's going to take place. I've been struck actually by the fact that Putin has been trying to divide NATO and to get different messages from the different leaders in NATO. And I think, unfortunately, he has succeeded in that because instead of having one single voice from NATO, we appear to be having a number of people going to Russia to see Putin, and he will pick up on any difference, however small, in the discussions that he's having with Macron or with the Prime Minister, our own Prime Minister, or indeed anybody from NATO that goes to Russia. And I think that's wrong. I think NATO should have been sending a single representative to speak to the Russian authorities instead of having a succession of people going to speak to him. Because what he wants to do, of course, is to portray NATO as the bad guy in all of this. We know that NATO is a defensive organisation. However, he's trying to portray them as something different. And we've heard about this. I always think it's amusing when we enter into a discussion on these things. There are always these new terminology. So the new terminology is a false flag. So a false flag is that Putin is hoping that people in NATO will give him the opportunity to blame them if there is an invasion coming. So I think that's what we have to be aware of, the sort of politics that's going on behind the scenes. But I have to say, it is worrying when we're now starting to talk about when, not if.
The differences that have been expressed by different leaders of NATO countries that you've alluded to have not been trivial. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, has waded into the debate today, talking about a whiff of Munich being in the air. This is a reference, of course, to the Munich Agreement of 1938, preceding the Second World War. And I wondered, Paul, whether this whiff of Munich was a reference to you. What do you think?
Very possibly, Michael. I just think it's complete hyperbole in that respect. I mean, it seems to me that every single conflict the UK finds itself involved in, or potential conflict, at some point, either the media or the government will roll out the scenario of Munich. We saw it over Iraq. We saw it actually over Suez as far back as that. We've seen it over Syria. We're now seeing it over Ukraine, where people just try to draw parallels and say, look, if we don't act, then we're going to find a situation that we were in 1938, where we appease this kind of fascist regime. And I just don't actually think it's a sensible way to go around having the debate by inflaming things in that way. I mean, I have to say, I think there are going to be look, I don't know if an invasion is imminent. I think Putin would be a bit stupid, frankly, to invade Ukraine. But it seems to me, with the level of certainty that people are suggesting that it's going to happen, there's going to be a few people left with egg on their faces if it didn't happen. I mean, this idea that, as Arlene said, we can even predict the day that it's going to happen, I think is a little bit over the top. And it seems to me, actually, when you read the reports of what Ukrainians themselves are saying, including government figures in Ukraine, they seem quite nonplussed by the whole thing. So when you have Western politicians saying, look, we've seen evidence suggesting that an invasion's imminent, and you hear senior government figures in Ukraine saying, would you mind sharing that evidence with us because we're not aware of it, you have to wonder whether or not what's being reported is accurate, frankly.
I'm going to move subject in just a second, but I am just going to respond to what Paul said, because I do think there are parallels with Munich, actually. I mean, for example, we talk about whether there's going to be an invasion of Ukraine. There have been two already. 2 chunks of Ukraine have already been seized by Russia. We do need to remember that this is the same Russia that invaded Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. These people do have form. One of the things that was said in 1938 was that there were no further aspirations in Europe that Hitler had. It's pretty clear that Putin does have further aspirations in Europe. Now, I'm not saying we should go to war over it, which was the choice in 1938, but that this person at some point needs to be resisted, I think, is without doubt.
I think the huge flaw in your argument is the suggestion that this is still the Russia that went into Hungary in 1956, for example. I think actually Russia today is, look, undoubtedly it's a corrupt country, and Putin is a despot, there's no doubt about that. But the idea that today's Russia is A, politically aligned with the Soviet Union, I think is wrong, and B, has anything like the power of the Soviet Union, I think is simply wrong. I think today's Russia is a very different kind of country. And we have to look at, frankly, America's record. When America talks about countries being sovereign and Russia not interfering with countries on its border, America has been doing that since the Second World War. America has intervened in Latin America, for example, time and time again when a Latin American country decides to elect a government that doesn't work to America's interests or that America doesn't like. So there's a stench of hypocrisy in this debate, and that needs to be exposed, and it isn't being exposed in the media, unfortunately. And making that point does not make you a supporter of Putin, let me stress that.
I'm itching to respond further, but I did promise that we would move on. And first of all, Arlene, have you got some more GB views for us?
Yes, sorry, Michael. I was laughing at their interaction between the two of you there in relation to all of that. But if we are moving on, just to read on some GB views then that have come in, Max says, and this goes back to the story that we opened up with this morning, that it's more than obvious that Sadiq Khan is the main problem here. Being a Labour man, he will do anything to show that a Conservative appointed police commissioner is not doing a good job. Rachel then says that, well, she's saying that some of the sources that you quoted are not credible and they are biased. And Stuart says that the attitude of police officers comes directly from their leadership. If their leadership is going to be more interested in politics than policing, then of course the standard of policing is going to suffer. Those are some of the views that are coming in from our viewers. Please keep sending them in and we'll keep relating them to everybody else.
Yes, thank you, Arlene. Please keep those views coming. When COVID-19 rapidly spread around the world in the early part of 2020, it left us all wondering, what is this virus and where did it come from? Theories and studies linking bats, soil and leaks from Chinese laboratories have been circulating since the pandemic began. But where did the virus really come from, and who or what is really behind it? Joining us now to discuss this is renowned scientist and co-author of Viral, the search for the origin of COVID-19, Matt Ridley. Welcome to the programme, Matt. So what is the answer? Where did it come from?
We don't know. We still don't know. And it's shocking that we don't know. We're 2 years into this pandemic, more than 2 years. And in the case of SARS, we knew within a few months that the people catching it were food handlers, that civet cats in markets were infected with a 99% cousin, and that was the route by which it was being caught. In the case of MERS, Nipah, all these other emerging viruses, it was pretty quick. 2 years in, with much superior technology, we still don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we're not allowed to investigate properly. We had a World Health Organization investigation that held a press conference a year ago this week, which was a farce and basically endorsed a farcical Chinese theory that it had reached Wuhan on frozen food. The things we do know, Michael, are that it's a bat virus originally, no question about that. Horseshoe bats carry SARS-like viruses, that's for certain. And that it broke out in Wuhan, 1,000 miles away from where these bats carrying these viruses are generally found. So the central question we have to ask is how it got from one to the other. And the two leading hypotheses are that somebody smuggled some wildlife to a market in Wuhan and people got infected that way, which is what happened in the case of SARS, or that the scientists who were collecting large numbers of viruses, over 100 SARS-like viruses of different kinds, and taking them to Wuhan, which was the leading center for studying SARS-like viruses in the world, slipped up somewhere and there was an accidental release.
Matt, you're telling me that you've written a book, and the answer to the question is we don't know.
Yes, but it's a fascinating, gripping detective story along the way. And we fully expected, my co-author and I, Alina Chan, that while we were writing the book, the answer would emerge. We're even more intrigued to have got to the end of writing a book and published it, and it's going to come out in paperback this year and all that kind of thing. And we're updating it now, but we still don't know the answer. And there's a big vested interest in the Chinese establishment, but also to some extent in the scientific establishment, in having the waters close over this story and say, well, the trail's gone cold, we may never know, and so on. Well, that's worrying, because the two leading hypotheses, that it was the market or that it was the lab, both lead to necessary actions. You know, we need to have regulations on labs to stop doing gain-of-function experiments that are highly risky. And we need to have regulations on the wildlife trade to stop people trading in animals that can pick up these viruses. We're doing neither, frankly. There's not much cracking down on either of those routes. And that means we're a sitting duck for the next pandemic.
Arlene, you have interviewed Matt before. Are you frustrated that we still don't know the answer, even after his new book?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the book sets out a very clear trajectory, Matt, if you don't mind me saying so, towards the lab. But I mean, I'm interested because when we spoke before, you had indicated that America and indeed ourselves should be pushing in relation to this issue, because when Australia said to China, well, actually, we believe it came from you guys, and we think that you're to blame, they face sanctions as a result of that. How do we get to the answer, given that it is China? And we're going to discuss China later on, actually, in relation to trade. But how do we get in behind that to find out the answer?
Yeah, well, you know, when I raised this question a number of times in Parliament in 2020 and early 2021, I was always told, let's leave it to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization took an awful long time to negotiate terms for visiting Wuhan. When they did so, they basically went on a tourist tour. They went to a museum. They went to the wrong lab of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, etc. And then they held this press conference where they endorsed the Chinese theories. So, frankly, the fact that the World Health Organization was doing a poor job prevented the rest of the world calling for an independent investigation. And I think we need some kind of bipartisan COVID commission, COVID origin commission in the United States or, you know, sort of transatlantic, you know, because there's a lot of UK expertise that we could call on here, and with countries like Australia and others involved, leading, frankly, to a pandemic treaty where we all agree to be much more open with what we're doing in labs, what information we will share if there's an event, and so on. If we have such a treaty, sure, China might not sign it, but it would put pressure on them eventually to do so. I mean, just an interesting parallel here. In 2007, there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease near Pirbright in Surrey. Pirbright is the site of the world's leading reference laboratory on foot and mouth disease. That turned out not to be a coincidence, but Britain didn't say, well, none of you are allowed to know what went on here. We're not going to tell you if we find that there was a contractor mending a broken pipe at the lab who then went to a farm nearby, which is what we did tell the world. China has the world's leading SARS-like coronavirus laboratory. It's in Wuhan. An outbreak has occurred within 10 miles of that lab. They ought to be behaving like we did over that foot and mouth disease and say, here's all the information we know. Let's let the media know about it. Let's let the scientific establishment know about it. That's what we're lacking.
Matt, you speak up for transparency, which is a great theme. And I've teased you a tiny bit this morning, but I just want to congratulate you on the great investigative work that you have done. Thank you for being with us today as well. Coming up after the break, we're asking whether the UK government pursuing closer economic ties with China is the right course of action. Please stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction on GB News. The Prime Minister has ordered the government to organise talks with Chinese officials for the first time since 2018 in a bid to achieve closer trade ties with the nation. The move has sparked a backlash from a group of Tory MPs who are concerned about the potential security risks of closer links with China. The move is said to be politically dangerous for Boris Johnson, who is already facing a possible challenge to his leadership after a recent plethora of scandals. Joining us now is the Member of Parliament and former Conservative Party leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. Ian, how marvellous to see you. Shall we just start? Good morning. Shall we just start with the charge sheet against China, because I've seen you expressing it rather clearly in your latest démarche on this subject.
Well, I've been concerned about China for some considerable time, and the fact that the West, the free world, has rushed to China for cheaper goods over the years has made China into an even more powerful threat than I think it might otherwise have been. The arrival of President Xi has shifted the balance dramatically in the way that China behaves to the outside world, and the list is just growing and phenomenal. You know, the country that has literally occupied the South China Seas, even though the UN has said they had no rights to it. They're now threatening Taiwan on a regular basis with military action. But worse than that, internally, you know, they are, I believe, absolutely guilty of genocide in Xinjiang. I mean, Sir Geoffrey Nice's tribunal, which is a serious tribunal, has come to the balance of judgment that it is likely that genocide is being committed. They've been committing a form of that in Tibet for some considerable time. We have very strong evidence from Chinese documents about the slave labor elements that are used. So many products that the UK and others now use actually use slave labor in their production. All the cotton, I think about 40% of the world's cotton, is produced out of Xinjiang, and a huge amount of that is involved in forced labor. So all of these areas, you know, the imposition of the crackdown on the Christians and the Falun Gong, and then the serious problems in Hong Kong after they trashed the Sino-British Agreement and now arresting what were peaceful democracy campaigners. I mean, China is a very powerful nation now, and very financially powerful too. And I think the real problem we've got is that the government is conflicted over this. And you've just been talking to Matt Ridley, and I was fascinated to listen to that interview. The reality is, even if we can't show that China did something in a laboratory or whatever, the real problem comes from how China behaved after it was obvious that there was human-to-human transfer back in December, almost certainly. First of all, it locked up and seriously trashed the reputation of scientists inside China who brought this to the attention of the world. And then it proceeded to block any further investigations. It wasn't until late January that they admitted to the WHO that they had a problem, by which time it had spread around the world. So millions have died because the world, the WHO and others, were not prepared to face up to China and demand that China behaved in a proper and reasonable way. And there are plenty more in this charge sheet, but I think that's enough to be going on with.
Yes, that's the charge sheet, but I think quite a lot of people would say, well, all right, there are lots of countries that behave very badly. Why should this impact on British jobs and British companies? Why should we try to stop Liz Truss approaching China for trade deals?
Well, I think the evidence of really what's happened since we've made ourselves so dependent on China then explains how the world, the Western world, the free world, then behaves. We have not called out China seriously on any of these issues at all. And instead of which, we've rushed China for all sorts of production of goods. The result is we've now become not just wholly dependent, but I believe wholly dependent on a malign organization. So, for example, after a large campaign we mounted in 2019, 2020, cross-party, by the way, we managed to block the government giving Huawei the 5G contract. It turns out that the security services were quite clear about the fact that Huawei poses a direct threat to our security. We've got them locked into our nuclear industry now, and there's a very strong belief that they pose a direct threat to that. UK universities are literally beholden to China for money to a degree that really affects how their science projects go. And we've found lots of Chinese postgrad students involved in often defense contracts over here, then heading back to China. China has a very clear view under President Xi about how the world should look, and it absolutely dismisses the idea of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. They believe their system of government is the only system of government that works, and they are promoting it around the world into the developing world, where they give these huge loans, which become very serious debts hanging around the necks of many of these countries. I mean, you know, they make you, if you take a loan, buy their goods. They then send people to implement them. So, you know, it's a huge problem with China, and it's no good rushing back to them to ask and beg for more. We've seen what happens when you become dependent. During the COVID outbreak, why did we struggle to get any of the things that we needed, respirators, PPE equipment? Because it was all made in China. And China, of course, was looking after itself first. So there's a big question about this idea that we don't retain any strategic production or anything here in the Western world. And I think these are big questions to be asked. There's no question that China poses and wants to pose that direct threat to undermine us.
Smith, very clearly spoken. I believe you're in a hurry to get to a football match. So we'll let you go. And that gives me a segue into this next story, which is that a very shocking video was released this week showing West Ham footballer caught Zouma kicking and slapping his cat. The footage understandably went viral, leading to international outrage and demands that the footballer be prosecuted for animal abuse and kicked out of the West Ham squad. The footballer issued a public apology and the club condemned Zouma's actions, fined him £250,000. Reports say he could face up to 4 years in jail in his native France. Well, our sports commentator Aidan McGee joins us. Do you think that West Ham is right to go on playing him?
I do actually, Michael, because I think that we have to believe that the player can be rehabilitated, and we have to believe that he can be reintegrated into football, into society almost, as it were, if we're going to broaden it out, rather than have his life completely ruined. We've seen some people suggest on social media that, you know, he should be banged up in prison for a period of time, he should be kicked out of football. Now, we always criticise our big companies in this country and elsewhere, and I think you'd have to term a Premier League football club in that category now. You have to place them in that area. And they've refused to bow to the Twitter mob, and they've put the player back into action against Watford on Wednesday. No matter when you put him in, Michael, you're going to get a backlash. In fact, he's going to get a backlash now for the rest of his career. That's the reality for Kurt Zouma. He played against Watford. They put him out in the firing line. I think the easiest thing to do in some ways would have been to remove him from the firing line and in the hope that it would die down. I think West Ham actually hoped, and I know Premier League clubs quite well, having worked with them closely for 20 years, I think they hoped that the whole thing would die down if they just put him out there now on Wednesday to get it out of the way, and that the story would perhaps dissipate the closer we got to the weekend. Now, the backlash in the social media era dictates that that was never going to happen. In fact, it's got even worse. We're still talking about it at the weekend, although David Moyes has been defiant in his press conference on Friday that the player was going to play against Leicester City today. They're in an exalted position in the league. They're going for a top 4 place, Champions League, the first time that could happen in West Ham United's history. What a long way to go, though, it has to be said. But for now, Kurt Zouma's in the side today. I think he's going to play. I think he's going to start the game, and I think he'll start for the rest of the season.
Paul, should he play?
I think I disagree with Aidan in terms of whether or not he should have played the game against Watford. I think it was a miscalculation by West Ham to throw him into that game. I think we are such a nation of animal lovers that whenever anybody is seen to be doing something that's cruel to an animal, then they will inevitably and rightly get a lot of flack for it. So I think he was always going to face a lot of criticism, both from the fans. I mean, I understand he actually went down injured on the pitch during the game, and all the fans started chanting, "Now you know how your cat feels." So, you know, he was always going to get that level of stick. And I felt that from a tactical point of view, it would have been better for West Ham to say, look, he's in the public eye at the moment. He's clearly done something wrong. Let's just take him away from the spotlight. Let's let him, you know, disappear for a couple of games, and then we'll bring him back in. But, you know, the bottom line is what he did was pretty cruel. I saw the video, and it was very nasty stuff. And clearly, he needs to be reprimanded for it in a serious way.
I think that goes without saying, but I'm very worried about double or even triple jeopardy. That is to say, if you commit something which is potentially a criminal offence, you should be prosecuted for it. You should have your day in court. You should pay the penalty. But if you're also going to have your career ruined, and possibly have your career ruined even before you've had your day in court, this seems to me absolutely wrong. And I do believe now that many people stand in jeopardy of being tried by the media, tried by the Twitterati, and losing their careers. And even if they're guilty, I don't think the sentence should necessarily be that you lose your career. Arlene Foster, do you have maybe a quick reaction to that, and maybe some GB views as well, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I take your point about double jeopardy, Michael, but unfortunately there is double jeopardy for some people, because if you commit an offence that is directly linked to the operation of your career or your profession, then of course you do lose your job. I'm thinking about police officers, for example, who are found guilty of drink driving offences, you know, and things like that. So there is an element of double jeopardy, but I tend to agree with you that he should be prosecuted through the proper channels, and then, of course, West Ham should deal with it in whatever way they see fit. It has been a very unseemly, I have to say, episode, however, and when you see social media and you understand how much young people are influenced by social media, you know, what does that say? People who look up to him as a professional footballer, and I think that's probably the concerning piece.
Britain is experiencing a serious crisis with the cost of living. With disruptions caused by the pandemic, companies are said to be laying off staff and cutting wages. and the Bank of England has warned the nation to prepare for a reduction in living standards and sharp rises in inflation. What impact is the crisis going to have on families across the nation, and what can we expect in coming months? To discuss this, we're joined in the studio by Dawn Maria France. She's Editor-in-Chief of Yorkshire Women's Life. There's some implication, even in inviting you here today, that things might be different for women and that things might be different in the north. Is that likely to be so, do you think?
Well, what's really striking is North Yorkshire, which is seen as quite affluent, and it's the natural place for Conservative support. But the CAB in North Yorkshire has said they've seen a rise in phone calls from people who live in North Yorkshire, particularly when the £20 uplift disappeared. That caused people to suffer over £1,000 loss from their household budgets. And also in North Yorkshire, we've seen a lot of food banks moving into areas which largely went to working class areas. And the crisis is continuing. We're looking at the national insurance rise in April. We're looking at various bills going up. It's a real crisis. It's happening to a lot of people who would normally not actually have that experience. But the government announced an emergency measure in the form of a repayment of £200 as a discount for energy bills. But the CAB said that's not enough. We're seeing a rise in food banks as well. Although Labour has said VAT on energy bills should be scrapped to help support people, the people that I talk to don't think that's enough. They want to hear Labour have more voice and say more about the crisis and how it's going to support them. And this feels like a time for Labour to show that they're supporting working class families and families that are struggling. And also what was interesting was a survey by Zouma showed that rent in Yorkshire is going to go up by £50 a month. So you've got people struggling already, and with wages not really increasing as such, it feels like outside the M25, there's not the political mindset to speak about what's happening to people in the north, and people need to hear that voice.
Paul, I suspect some people inside the M25 would say, but wait a minute, the cost of living is a good deal cheaper in Yorkshire than it is inside the M25. And they might also say these discounts, which have been promised by the government for the lower bands of council tax, will disproportionately help places outside the M25. Would I be wrong to be hearing those comments?
I mean, technically that may be true, but I think the danger is that we create an artificial divide in some respects. I mean, there's no question that I think in many respects people in if you like, the more provincial parts of our country have it harder in terms of the financial difficulties that they face. But across the board, I mean, the squeeze on pay is the worst for 200 years at the moment. Real wages are falling for ordinary working class people. People are being hit hard by increased energy bills, national insurance, as Dawn said. And as a society, we need to find a way to get out of that. And my fear is that if we just slow wage growth in this way, we're going to hinder the economic recovery and make things worse.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather wet and windy at first, but rain and wind will gradually ease overnight. Let's take a look at the details. After a rather wet day in the southwest, it will turn drier this evening. Winds will gradually ease too, but it will be remaining on the cloudy side. A wetter end to the day across the southeast as heavy and persistent rain continues. It'll be windy here too. Also a cloudy end today across Wales, but rain will be lighter than it was earlier. Patchy rain and drizzle will continue throughout the evening and overnight. Across the Midlands now, rain will gradually ease, leaving a cloudy evening with outbreaks of drizzle at times. Heavy rain will clear northern England this evening, but the thick cloud could still bring some light rain at times. The cloud and brisk wind will keep temperatures up. It will be a wetter end to the day across Scotland, with some persistent rain and a little snow as well over the Highlands. Now, a damp end to the day also across Northern Ireland. The rain from earlier will bring a fair amount of spray on the roads across the UK, so take care if you're travelling this evening. Skies will stay cloudy overnight and heavy rain will gradually clear the southeast. However, further outbreaks of rain are likely, particularly in the north and west. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.